media for him, and also putting phone numbers for suicide prevention hotlines, and just those to get help however you can. And even Asmongold, who is one of the more prominent members of the community, has decided that he's going to donate 20,000 of his subs to a suicide prevention charity of someone's choice on Saturday. So the support has been tremendous for Reckful, but we here at ESPN Esports want to offer our condolences to the family and fans of Reckful. Certainly a sad day in esports and in gaming. Moving along to our topics at hand in Valorant, we'll move on to the developer update. Lots of major takeaways there, Emily, including the idea that there will be roughly 6 agents per year in terms of a rollout. We're going to get 2 months per act, 6 months per episode, 6 agents per year. What did you take away from Anna Donlan's presentation? She released a 5-minute plus video on the Valorant account and gave us a lot of information, including that. What were your major takeaways?
So I appreciate that they're already coming out with a cadence, because I think that's it's like a guideline for them to keep up with, and also a good expectation for the community to have. I think this is a lesson that they hopefully have learned from League of Legends, in that until they decided, like, we're only going to have we're going to try to only have 2 major patches. This actually, in my opinion, hasn't always been true, but they'll try to have 2 major patches where you get like the big preseason patch and then like a mid-season update. And players can expect that the majority of major meta changes will happen during that time. I think it's great to set that expectation. I think the release for agents it's going to be interesting. We still haven't really, because Valorant is so new, right? And there's like not a lack of content, but generally there's just less in the game right now. I think the ultimate goal is that they just want to add a lot more to the game itself, especially given how quickly it released post-beta. I'm not sure if the agent update gives enough time for people to adjust to new agents, especially if one is released and it's incredibly overpowered, but we'll see. I won't be able to really tell until I see better how they kind of want to balance things, but at the very least, I appreciate that they're really trying to be transparent about an update schedule, because I think that always really helps, A, them to stick to a specific timeline, but also B, the expectations of the competitive community, so they can know that this is coming.
My thought is, like, on the note of the agent cadence, like, how much is too much, right? I think one of the big questions I've had for Valorant is the fact that, like, because it's in this weird in-between, right? Like, so with League of Legends, there's, like, I think at this point more than 150 champs, right? Like, the number is pretty enormous. But there's also different positions that are very well defined, right? Based on the type of role, and the champions are very set in that position when they're created. There are some that play 2 or 3, very rarely 3, but sometimes 2 that can be flexed across the map. And so, like, with that game, right, like, you can have 150 characters, but or champions, but with Valorant, because, like, every role, like, yeah, there's different roles. There's the lurker, and there's an entry fragger, and everything else, just like they exist in Counter-Strike. But that, like, their agents, you can kind of play different agents based on that role. It's not as defined as it is in a MOBA. So for me, when you do this, right, like, I think that in some cases, like, Overwatch has had a little bit too many characters in some instances, right? And, like, also you're, like, running out of character ideas and identity, and then also you have to come up with things like Echo, who's, like, busted as hell in Overwatch, right? And incredibly hard to balance. And I hope when they're thinking about this that they really, like, they stop themselves, and rather than just putting out an agent to put out an agent, right, and, like, to make skins money or whatever that they're going to end up doing, right, like, because I'm sure that's coming, I really hope that they, like, take a lot of time to pause, because there's a way that this could be, like, super unbalanced really easily with that many agents, and having to be able to control that, and like, each agent having a different interaction with one another based on abilities. Like, there's so many factors to that, like, at some point it's going to be too many. So when is it too many? That's the big question for me in the next few years of Valorant.
Well, and as we've learned in League of Legends, even with all, I actually agree with what you say, right? It's a little bit easier to add a champ into League of Legends than it is to add an agent into a attack shooter like Valorant. But even then, we've seen some, like, really weird interactions and a lot of unforeseen things with itemization and stuff like that. So I think there are a lot of variables to worry about when introducing an agent to Valorant specifically, just because of the differences in the game type.
It's funny, I asked Taylor, who's the coach of TSM's Valorant team, how many agents is too many and what kind of agents he wants to see next. And we're going to talk about this later, because Emily put down a great breakdown of all the picks that happened during the T1 tournament.
Comps, they're here. Sort of.
In fact, if it were up to Tailored, he would have no healers at all in the game. So I thought that was interesting. The full interview's up. He was on Coach's Corner this Monday, but he goes to town talking about healers in the game and how he treats them and exactly why there was this ageless comp. We'll talk about that a little bit later. I do want to give the executive producer Anna Donlan and actually the entire Valorant team credit. We've talked a lot about their level of communication, which is very good, but also we have talked about toxicity a lot in the games, right? Like we've talked about this subject at length. And one thing that Anna did say was that she hired an entire team strictly dedicated to try and minimize this as much as possible in the game. So we might not see the immediate effect of that, but based on how Riot has handled Valorant, I do have a level of optimism that, and also the trust that Anna has established thus far with the rollout of this game, I do have a level of optimism that we will see some sort of change as it pertains to that particular topic in Valorant specifically. So I want to commend her because we often point out negatives, but that is a very big positive that should be noted.
Yeah, I mean, we can sit here, Arda, you and I can sit here and talk all day about toxicity towards women in games, but we don't have the actual experience of a woman playing video games. Anna Donlan is a director of this, is a higher up in Riot in overseeing the development of this game. I'm sure, being a woman in games, she has her own experiences, so I'm sure there's a level of personal take here that is, like, I'm saying that in an appreciative way. I'm glad that she has some personal experience to be able to sort of take this more seriously and be able to sort of contribute. So that's a positive for me. I'm happy about it.
She's talked about it too in interviews.
Yeah.
So she's been pretty upfront about her own experiences.
Yeah.
So let's move on and talk about the first big tournament that occurred since the global launch of the game, the T1 Valorant Showdown. One of the casters may or may not be in our chat right now, Simo, but it's up, buddy. So let's mention TSM, who now many people would consider, at least today, based on results, the best team in the world. Obviously, that is a bold statement to make because teams around the world cannot compete against each other right now. Understood. With that said, we love to make bold predictions here, at least I do, so I'm just going to go ahead and say it. TSM, until proven otherwise, are the best team in the world. The results speak for themselves. They pull out the Sageless comp, Emily. They make it work. Other teams in the tournament didn't make it work, but they did.
So, like, the thing I'll say is about Sageless comps that I think people need to understand is that, like, because of Sage's healing, right, she allows you to basically, like, to dumb it down to, like, a really simple level of understanding. She allows it that you can peek and withdraw with the heal, right? So you can scout a little bit easier. You can do a lot more things. You can play a little bit slower. I think with Sageless comps and the Sageless comps we saw being run on Ascent primarily, I think Ascent is definitely the map that most people are doing it on. It's really heavily reliant on 2 vision agents. So, like, Sova is a must on Ascent. He was 100% on Ascent the entire tournament. And then Cypher as well, which was had the highest pick rate in the entire tournament. But then you have smokes basically from all smokes or flashbangs from all of your other 3 characters in usually an Omen, a Brim, and a Phoenix. What happens is that you need to be really quick and you need to be really aggressive. And I don't think a lot of teams currently still have the coordination to pull it off. But if a team does have the coordination to pull it off, it can look insanely powerful. And I think the moment that Sageless comps will have, like, quote unquote made it, I think is when you end up forcing a mirror, right? When you play so fast and so aggressive that you are winning every time with that comp and you have to force a mirror from your opponents because they also need the smokes. So that'll be kind of like when I saw a few mirror matches from people playing TSM on Ascent with Sageless comps. We also saw C9 really struggle with Sageless comps when they brought them out, right? The only match they won against FaZe was the match that they played Sage, right, in their group. So I do think, though, the day that you see the mirror being forced is the day that we'll really say, like, okay, Sageless comps are now meta. But I really appreciated this from TSM. I was hoping we'd see it, and I'm really glad that TSM specifically played it, because to your point, they are considered the best, at least at the very least in North America, if not the world. So when a team with that amount of I guess respect or brand power or success plays a composition like this, it has the power to change the meta. But also shout out to Fabricant, who are playing it first, or not playing it first, but playing it the most successfully first over in Europe. So.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to this. So Rigna in the chat said that it's why the slow when shot is really important, because it does counter the healers a little bit, right? Like being able to not being able to easily gap close if you like get shot, and then being able to run to your stage really fast, right, and get that heal. Like, yes, that's important. I still think the slow's a little bit strong last I played, but like it's an important mechanic nonetheless, and I don't disagree with it in that context. Also, the nerf of the wall is super important, because if you are playing, if characters that are faster become meta more generally, then the wall is going to become obsolete because you can break it down so quickly, right? So to me, like they have certainly like found a better spot for Sage, I guess, in the game. Like I've said before, though, I think she'll always be relevant in the same way that like Morgan Thresher or Pathfinder is, or Morgan Thresher in League and Pathfinder is in Apex to a certain extent, because they offer some level of utility that other characters do not. The thing is with her, though, is the fact that like it's also very easy to put her in the ground too much. And I don't know if we've seen enough gameplay data to understand where she is exactly. I would say that it's good that she's not like an auto pick. As someone who actually likes Sage a lot, like I'm glad it's not an auto pick right now. But I want to be generally careful, because there's a world where she's like literally buried at some point too.
We will go into the meta a little bit more after what we have coming up here. Sage was picked, according to Emily's stats, 138 times out of 154 opportunities, so still second place at 90%.
Cypher dominated,
right?
Yeah.
Well, Cypher's just way too strong. That the information collection from Cypher, you can literally, be on bind. Sorry, on split. Be on split. You can literally have Cypher there alone with the cameras and completely get enough information to protect the site and tell your teammates to rotate in time. Like, Cypher is OP. I think if there's one character that needs a nerf in Valorant right now, it is Cypher. But I don't know if that's going to happen. We'll wait and see on that. Anyway, one thing I did fail to mention that we should mention now is last show we did a fantasy draft picking teams in an effort to see which of our 4 teams that we selected for the T1 tournament would win. The person who would have gloated the most if they won happens to be on vacation right now. So on behalf of Tyler, I'd like to say congratulations. And if I were to be able to give him something, it would be this right here. This, as you can see clearly, is an Mercedes AMG class vehicle. If you have spent any time, or if you've lived in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, like I have, you have one at all times. The other person who currently lives in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada, is Wardell, and we had a chance to catch up with Wardell. Oddly enough, the clip you're about to watch, he mentions the Sageless comp and exactly the genesis in TSM as to why. The answer might surprise you. There's a little bit more to the clip as well. Check it out. How does that sound to you, Wardell? Now, many people are considering you, if not the best team in the world, at least in North America. How does that sound to you?
Well, I don't really care about what people think about that. To be honest, if they think that we're the best, then let them think that. To be honest, I don't want to add any unnecessary pressure on myself by thinking that myself, because it's all a mental game when you go and compete, and I don't need to have that when we start losing a little bit and start choking a little bit. That's what happens.
One thing that we noticed was, especially on Ascent, no Sage from TSM, one of the only teams to do this. Take me through that. When did you guys start game planning that? When did you think that Sage wasn't necessary on Ascent?
So we didn't think. Basically, some people that played Sage don't want to play Sage anymore. They want to play some champions that are more fun, So that's why we made the change. To be honest, you don't need to play certain agents. It's just meta. You need to play what you're comfortable with, and then as long as you're good with it, then I think it's fine, to be honest. Like
So
people thinking that Sage is like necessary. It's not very true, to be honest.
Well, I was gonna say, like, yeah, most people would say that Sage is an essential part of a comp, especially on other maps. But so that the genesis of that really just was they didn't want to play Sage, so there's no Sage.
Yeah, pretty much. Sage is such a like boring champion. All you do is like heal, slow, wall, res, yo. Like, ain't nobody want to do that anymore. So like, we just switch it up. It's fine.
What do you-
with me.
Speaking of boring, there's also conversation online about the 2-op meta being boring. What do you think about that? Being the resident op expert in Valorant right now.
Oh, like how it's not balanced and all that.
Yeah, what do you think
Yeah,
about that?
I feel like it's just like people that don't know how to play around ops. Like, I'm pretty sure. I think that the CS:GO op is way more broken than the Valorant op because you can do so many things with it. You can quick scope, you can like no scope. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So like, they just don't know how to play around it. That's why they're like complaining and need it to be nerfed. They say like there are not enough abilities. You know what I'm saying? I don't think that's true at all. I think there's like enough abilities. You just have to play around it properly, and you just got to take the info given to you and use it properly.
Do you think the op is in line for a nerf though, based on how successful it's been used?
Not really. I feel like
No.
if it is nerfed, then it's like, what's the point of even having it? I feel like it's like it's really hard to retake because of the how you scope in, and usually this game is played off retakes. Like it's much easier to retake, so that's why there's a lot of retaking going on. If you even nerf it even more, then what's the point of retaking with op? It's just like pretty useless. It's really hard to retake it at the beginning. I mean, at the retake, when we're retaking anyway. So it's like there's no point of nerfing it.
Okay. So the full interview will be available at youtube.com/ESPN Esports at the end of the show. One thing that Taylor mentioned, his coach, when I asked him about the multiple op meta and people being bored watching it, but also just trying to defend it, his answer was, people don't want the op to be nerfed. They want Wardell to be nerfed. And he is like, I mean, look, he's the best op out there right now, and his stats speak for itself. A 30 burger in that last game in the final was absolutely insane. But let's go back to the meta and the picks, Emily. Was there any agent that surprised you, even like in terms of a high number of selections or a low number of selections?
I didn't expect the incredible variance in groups, I'll say, like especially watching some matches in Europe. I was expecting Breach and Jet to see a little bit more play than they did. And I don't know if that's just like an NA versus EU meta thing that is going on, and NA teams think that these agents aren't as powerful as EU teams do. But there was one entire group that went completely jetless and another group that went completely breachless. And that really surprised me, especially the lack of breach in an entire group. And obviously, like, groups are not necessarily... Like, we had the Group C where the Omen and Jet stats were so skewed because Team Ninja played the same exact comp every single game. Right?
Yes,
but like
they
that,
did.
it makes sense. Like, I'm not blaming them for that, right? Like, they're gonna play what they're comfortable with.
Can I just interject on Team Ninja? Ninja was not the problem. He had players on his team.
He played well.
He played very well. He had players
Go
on
for
his
it for the
team
spikes
that had
planted.
only picked up
Oh,
Valorant
show me the
like
money, Ninja.
hours
Let's see what you
before
got
the
here. Beautiful
tournament.
movement, the man's
That was the problem.
abilities
His
with a shotgun.
teammates
Who'd have thought
were
it?
the
That
ones that were
Fortnite
dragging him
prowess
down.
showing
Ninja
through,
actually
and well,
did
this
very
is a round and a
well.
half.
And by the way, he aced T1.
I thought this
Okay,
was
can we
clearly
just
a
make
safe
sure that
situation,
everybody
and if you look at the
recognizes this?
minimap, he's
He
got a little
aced
bit of a
T1
window.
people. Like, that is not something you just
No
gloss
one
over.
watching the center. Ninja can
Ninja,
relocate.
T1,
He's still about where he started, though, and
Ace.
eventually he's going to get found. Braxton's up top, but Ninja's faster.
I
Going
think,
for
yeah,
Ace now. One
I
player
mean,
to
yeah, I'll
beat.
say those
Time
are the
ticking
most
away.
surprising things to me. That Group B went entirely breachless.
running out of
It's
time.
probably
He's gotta
the
make
most
his move. He
surprising
knows
thing
it.
to me. But then Group D
Oh,
also
this is a bit of a
going
shame
jetless.
because
Just
it looks so
I
damn
think
good.
in
Scooter was
maybe
flying,
coming
Time
weeks
Laser's
we'll
one
see
job.
more NA teams
A Ninja.
hopefully pulling out the jet, because
truly-
even in the later stages of the tournament, it was really TSM, right? And if we think of Jet players in NA, like C9 got eliminated early, right? And so you're left with Wardell and TSM. I hope that more people kind of explore what Jet can bring as an entry fragger, because I feel like everyone played her on release and everyone was like, oh, she's not nearly as good as we thought. And we've seen a little bit more attention paid to like Raze, which I mean, Raze is still really strong as well, but also Breach. I don't know. I think Jet needs to get a slightly fair shot if we can have some of those Jet players kind of coming up and giving her more of a chance in competitive events.
I feel like a lot of young players are just going to gravitate towards her too, like a lot of the newer players, just because like she is like, Jet is fun. She may not necessarily be meta from a competitive perspective,
fun.
but she's super fun, and she is like, you know, she gets the Yasuo comparisons because of the whole win thing, but like that is like it's not an inappropriate comparison, because Yasuo players are very like single entity minded, and the fact that like they're a lot of self-focus and not team focused by people that play that character feels somewhat similar about Jet also. Like it is the highlight play character, and so like I would like to see her more generally be more effective in competitive play, because I think when we see like players, solo queue players start getting picked up on teams, and look, we're probably talking a few years out before people get over the Counter-Strike high. But nonetheless, like I think that there will be many players who excel at the highest levels of Valorant that are new to esports altogether that are Jet players.
I am waiting for, and it could be somewhere around the world. There's going to be one tournament. Maybe it's an open qualifier, and we're going to talk about them coming up. But there's going to be some player that treats Jet like a blank canvas and like artistry. Like we're going to see things.
Bob Ross.
Yeah, I mean the best artist out there. I even have Bob Ross in my background there. But it will be so paradigm shifting how some player out there will utilize Jet and just that mobility that we will have not seen this before, and that will completely, in my opinion, if and when that happens, that's going to be a meta shifting moment, because people are going to see that it's going to dominate a tournament, and people are going to say, we better learn this because this is going to take over very fast. Like she just has so much mobility function that no other agent truly has, that I don't think it has been truly mastered at the top levels just quite yet.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think a lot of agents have been mastered at the top levels. I feel bad for, like, I don't know if people were expecting me to say that I was surprised that I didn't see as much Reyna or Viper, but I'm not surprised, especially since the Reyna numbers almost entirely came from what Together We Are Terrific and Code 7, I think, were the two like teams primarily experimenting with Reyna, if I remember correctly, and then Viper was only picked twice in the entire event. So
1%.
She is still not considered competitively viable, at least in North America. So we will wait until that day.
I know that this has to do with nerfs and buffs, but I do think Breach at 26%, that is a change from the closed beta. Breach was an essential agent until recently, and now Breach is the fourth least pick, or was the fourth least pick agent in the T1 Showdown. Why don't we talk about teams? Cloud9, what is going on there? We were expecting big things from Cloud9 in this tournament. Woof. Tens and Friend and Associates did not do so well in this tournament. What do we attribute that to?
My snake draft. No. I mean, I attribute it mainly to the fact that they were experimenting with Sageless comps on Haven and Split, and got beaten by Together We Are Terrific, and also Prospects. So I mean, I think part of it was that they were obviously, I don't know if they had success with the Sageless comps in scrims, and then we're coming into this event being like, okay, we can go Sageless on any map. But I think you can definitely see a difference as to how TSM played the Sageless comps and what maps they chose to run it on, aka Ascent, and what maps even other teams chose to run it on, aka Ascent. And C9 just seemed to be kind of experimenting with it on every map until their final series against FaZe where they did not run Sageless comps. So I think that's part of it. I think in order, again, I said this before, but I think in order to go Sageless, you do have to have a really aggressive and coordinated play style from the get-go because you don't get that second chance to peak, right? Like you aren't going to be able to go back and get topped off or healed up. So I think that makes a huge difference in the way you have to play these compositions, and not every team is going to be able to execute that. So, I mean, for C9, they're still figuring out their lineup, right? Even though they've kind of run with this group, they're not set, they're not signed. So I think kind of like how we talked about FaZe's approach to this event, I think C9 are still actually taking that similar approach where they're really trying to figure out who they want to put around 10s and now relics.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we'll see. I guess we'll see in the next tournament that they compete in. Which do we know what that will actually be? Like, what's the next big one on the North American calendar?
Taylor said that we don't know officially as of yet, but we do know that Taylor essentially said that he would not be surprised at all if every major organization made a play to host a tournament at some point in the next several months. I think that's something we can fairly assume or speculate that we will see a FaZe Clan tournament, a TSM tournament, a 100 Thieves tournament. Like, I think that every major org will have some sort of tournament presence as we move along. Just like we heard we got an announcement of a Vitality tournament before they even signed a team, but there's actually a specific reason for that. They made it into an open, presumably so that they and other European teams could scout players. Which is a very smart play.
I think a couple things there I want to digest. I actually talked to Joe Marsh this week as part of the Even Global Esports Conference, and I asked him about sort of the move to host some more tournaments, and he had mentioned that they would be announcing also a tournament with MKWAO and actually Anti prior to everything that's come out today, and obviously it was released to T1, but I think you're right in saying that a bunch of teams will want to host tournaments. I would look towards teams who are already part of the Riot ecosystem, because there are some teams that are a part of the Valorant ecosystem that are not partners in the LCS, the LEC, the LCK, etc. It's way easier to be partners with Riot if you're already a part of their sort of orbit rather than it is going on the outside. Because Joe was actually telling me there was a very deep level of vetting that Riot had their hand in on planning this Ignition tournament, right? That and not that I'm unsurprised by that, by the way, the fact that they want to be very careful about who they let into the funnel of their game. But yeah, I certainly think that I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a Cloud9, right? Like someone who's already an LCS partner, right? And has a long tenured history with them, host something like that. That's not and Vitality is one of those teams, right? Vitality is a LEC partner. So to your point, I think that's right.
I mean, you can even see it, just to interject, you can even see it in the rest of the Ignition series with Order and Rage, who are both, I believe, have existing partnerships with Riot through League of Legends in the Oceania and Japanese scenes.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think definitely would expect more teams to host tournaments. And to the other point, right, I think I'm curious to see sort of how, I guess volatile is the word I'm looking for, Valorant rosters will be. Will Cloud9 up and say from here, we're making a change immediately, right? Because they haven't technically signed anyone other than the Relics and Tins. So they could just bounce one of these players off the team by the time the next tournament rolls around. Is one tournament enough of a sample set to say, nah, this isn't it? And I don't know, because I haven't gotten quite a feel for how volatile Valorant is at this point in its open system, but I wouldn't be surprised if we see a different C9 roster, whatever the next big tournament is in the NA circuit.
Crouch Val in the chat, we will be talking about the EU Open, the Vitality tournament in a little bit. I just want to tie a bow on Cloud9. Even though they didn't have a good tournament performance, Tens did have a terrific individual performance. He had the second highest KD in the entire tournament, and also was the only player, even though he only played 151 rounds, in comparison, TSM and Wardell played 315 rounds. He was the only player to go 6.0 in kill ratio per round. So that is very impressive for tens specifically. Now, another player who had a good individual performance as compared to the team was Hiko and 100 Thieves. Hiko went 1.41. That is third in the tournament in T1 in KD. Had a .89 per round. Very impressive for Hiko. Not so impressive for 100 Thieves. But still, let's digest and let's unpack and what you saw, Emily, from this team, the former Team High Ground players and Hiko. What did you make of the tournament together?
I mean, I think like this is their first tournament together. They get a little bit of leeway for that. I think they pretty well, actually. Like, they lost to FaZe 2-1, and then they like narrowly lost to Immortals in the second round of
They beat Together We Are Terrific, so you got to give them a little bit of credit.
Well, and they beat Together We Are Terrific with like a much less even. That IMT map was 13-12 for IMT. So and IMT proved they were essentially the third place team in this tournament, right? Like, they did really, really well. So I feel like there's not, like, I'm sick of the whole get Hiko a team, free Hiko, like, Hiko's trapped on 100T. Like, I actually disagree with that. I really liked this event, and the fourth that they wouldn't have been able to beat FaZe the second time around either, if they'd managed to beat Immortals. So, I mean, I don't think saying for 100 Thieves, I don't think they had a terrible tournament.
I don't think it is either. I think that I think the expectation, and partly this is my fault for hyping them up a little bit last week, but I think the expectation for them was maybe a little bit higher than what they were capable of achieving at this moment. But I still think they're like not going to be a bad team by any means once they're sort of all integrated. So, yeah.
Hiko had the third highest, actually was tied for second in the maximum kills in one map at 25. Tens had 39 in the tournament. Someone else who did very, very well as we move on to FaZe Clan is Corey. He had the second highest average combat score in the entire tournament at 256. These stats, by the way, are from VLR.GG. Excellent website as a good resource there. But Corey, I think, impressed greatly this tournament. Fantastic showing and lived up to the hype as well, because we had been waiting a very long time before the FaZe Clan announcement that we wanted to know where. We always talked about this mechanical genius that had success World Cup and was one of the shining of Overwatch League despite being on not such a great team. And then suddenly he quits and goes to Valorant. Everyone's waiting. Where's he going to go? He's trying out with teams. He finally signs with FaZe. Their final form. The team captain wasn't even playing this past weekend to make room for those players that were trying out. But Corey just finding his own in this game, but also gelling well with this team and just bringing them together. Showing. What did you see?
Yeah, I think that's right. In the fact that together, and that's why Jason R was not a part of this team over the weekend, right? Because coming together in like pro scrims, right? And Corey like wanted to play with people. I think that there is probably a player or two on this team that will get signed officially to FaZe Clan. If I'm a betting man, Zachary is probably one. But yeah, I think, certainly so well. They topped their group. And yeah, I don't know. Like, if you look at them, like the successful first showing for me, I wouldn't mind them sticking with a commitment to Jason R. I think they'll stick with it. And I think that they may pick up some pieces from this. But like, if this was a tryout, then well done by a lot of the people involved, in my opinion. I don't really have any negative things to say. Like, they performed about as I expected. They lost to they lost to Immortals and they lost to TSM, who I consider like like not much more to say other than like pretty good showing from them for the first time.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what I saw from FaZe. I thought Marv played really well too. I think he, like, not revelation, but he stood out to me a lot in watching this team play. It was kind of cool how they swapped the operator around on the team, which I thought was kind of interesting. They seemed to be swapping it more than other teams. I don't know if that's just my perception. Viewed the VODs closely enough, but it seemed like they were swapping that around, which I thought was really interesting as well, and kind of a testament to the talent that they have, or that they played with for this lineup. I do think there's an interesting comparison in perception, though, from FaZe to 100 Thieves, where in my opinion they performed like at about the same level, honestly, regardless of like where they finished, given the circumstances and context of who they had to face. So I find it interesting that the community perception is that like FaZe were super good and 100T were super bad. And like community perception like that always really interests me. I disagree. I actually think that FaZe did well, and I think that 100T did pretty well also. So.
And to be fair, I think we should mention, and as we move to Immortals here, they only lost by 1 round in overtime to Immortals to get eliminated from the tournament. Did 100 Thieves, I should say. Mm-hmm. And let's focus on Immortals now. They were a top 4 team in this tournament. I don't know if many people would have put them that high in this tournament. Certainly one to watch, but there were definitely 4 other teams that people would have predicted that would have gone further in this tournament. So Immortals got stomped by TSM in their first game in groups, right? And you thought that might have set the tone, but they rallied, they got out of groups, and then they had an impressive run. They beat Sentinels, they lost to T1, but then they beat 100 Thieves, they beat FaZe Clan, and then they took Immortals to the limit, 13-10. So that is a good run for this team that had seen a little bit of success in the closed beta, maybe not as much as other teams. But this is a good showing, Emily, for Immortals.
Yeah, Immortals were one of the more exciting teams to watch this past weekend, honestly. It's funny because I was interviewing the interim GM for the league team, Mike Schwartz, about the league roster while they were playing their first match. And we had just gotten off our pre-show. And I was like, yeah, like we talked up Immortals. I talked your team up. And he's like, well, we just got like absolutely raffle stomped by TSM. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. But this team, like I think Immortals' approach to building this team in terms of scouting talent and putting this roster together and really relying on the synergy that the players had together, as well as some like statistical analysis, is pretty interesting. It's particularly interesting to do in a game that just got out of closed beta. But I mean, I really liked watching Immortals play. If I had to point out a standout player from this weekend, it would actually be Asuna for me. I thought he played really, really well. But this team is definitely, I feel like they're not sexy on paper, but they're really, really good. And I have a soft spot in my heart for teams like that because people were really critical of this Immortals roster when they were first signed, where they were like, we don't know who's on this lineup. These aren't all like, professional CSGO players, so this lineup's going to suck. And I am glad that they were able to prove a lot of people wrong. And this is a really good proving ground for them too, right? Because the only other tournament that they've done like really, really well in was the First Light event, right? But if you watch them play in that, I think you could also predict that it was possible for them to have a deep run in the T1 NSG Showdown. So I'm glad that they performed as well as they did.
I will save my gloating as someone who was on the Immortals hype train last week.
Good job, Jacob. We'll give you some golf claps.
I think they're like, in my opinion, like they are like the little engine that could, right? Like they like Emily said, right? Like they are not big and sexy in the way that in a lot of these other teams are, right? Like But they are a team that I think that will perform well over time and have room for improvement. The biggest question I have for some of these teams, right, particularly some that are aligned with ex-Counter-Strike players that don't do too well, right, is like, what is the ceiling? Like, how good are those players just at FPS games in general, right? I don't know the answer for that for Immortals yet, and I feel like that's a good thing, because I feel like their room to grow and their ceiling actually could be very, very high. I was impressed by their performance in this. I was impressed by their performance in First Light. I expected them to do well in this. I do think very fairly they are a top 5 team in all of Valorant right now. If you want to factor in some of the rest of the world, it's hard to tell, obviously, because of what's going on with COVID-19 and the fact that we don't have offline events. But nonetheless, like, yeah, like I expect them to I understand they got blown out by TSM, but like if it was a series in the first place, right? Like I expect them to take TSM and T1 as they did in the lower bracket final. I expect them to take TSM and T1 to competitive games, like it, especially in a series format. So yeah, like I have like real faith in this Immortals team long term that they can be competitive with the best of them, and I think that they showed that this past weekend.
And you're not on the Immortals hype train whatsoever, Jacob, because Kohler is in the chat.
No,
that has nothing to do with it. I just wanted to confirm that. I'm just doing some journalism here. I just noticed that he was in the chat, and I just wanted to ask. That's all.
I ripped their League of Legends management and said to fire them, and
Okay,
obviously
but
they did that. So like,
Kohler has nothing to do with their League of Legends team.
Yeah.
I get it.
He's
I
not
get
gonna go play jungle for Immortals. He's not gonna replace the Smithy or anything.
No, I get it. But I'm saying I've been very critical of the Immortals organization when it is
Fair.
deserved. I have been very praising of the Immortals organization when it is also deserved. So, you know, praise some Valorant and praise League a little bit for this past weekend, but nonetheless, you know, criticism where criticism's due.
Yeah.
I'll be fair and ethical here. Thank you.
One last team I want to mention is Gen.G. If there was one team that you had high hopes for that didn't necessarily perform in this tournament or just didn't go as far as you thought they might, it's Gen.G. They definitely had some great results in the closed beta. They got out of groups, and they lost to T1 and then to Sentinels. Some tough matchups there for sure, but how do you treat this if you're Gen.G, Emily? Do you see this as a massive negative and a concern, or is this simply, you know what, it's the first tournament, let's not worry about it, we'll just regroup and do better next time?
I mean, I think the more like, I guess, quote unquote, like concerning matches would be the times that they faced Sentinels. I don't know how people feel about Sentinels. I don't know how I feel about Sentinels, because going into this event, I was like, I think that they have to perform really, really well for me to consider them like close to being a top team. And people had said they'd been performing really well in scrims, and they came out and were like fine, like okay, I guess. But not the level of performance that you'd expect from some of the high profile signings that they had. Whereas Gen.G are kind of the opposite, right? Again, like very, very like comparatively low profile team that they were relying on synergy in the way the team worked together. And I think they did end up playing T1 closely on Haven when they met them in the upper bracket. But then the losses to Sentinels, both in group stage and in the lower bracket, are probably the more concerning ones. I think Gen.G will and should probably stick with this lineup for a little bit longer, because with this kind of lineup, you're kind of relying on them to continue to improve as a unit, and that's the risk that you're taking, as opposed to we're bringing in a bunch of players, gathering them together, and they're going to take some time to gel, but once they do, it's going to be awesome. So I think this roster should be given a little bit more room to breathe before we start calling it like a failed experiment. Like, I think reactions to Valorant teams right now are like very snap judgment, and I'm very curious to see how management from certain teams handles it, because there are so many eyes on how this is developing as an esport, but people are so reactionary after like one match or one tournament. Like this is the first, in my opinion, this is the first like major competitive event that we've had in North America.
We never see snap judgments in esports rosters ever.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what I am curious. Like Jacob mentioned previously, right? Like we're curious about how much volatility we're going to see from lineup to lineup. So I do hope that Gen.G like continues to give this team maybe a little bit of breathing room before making any decisions. I mean, I'd say the same thing for any team right now, honestly.
Jacob, let me ask you.
Except maybe C9.
Well, C9 only technically has 2 players, so they can change out anyone but relics and tens.
And you could argue that they have arguably the best or top 2 player in Valorant right now that he just doesn't have a team around him. So there's the scary potential for Latens James is still there. Let me end on this for the T1 tournament and then bring this up to Valorant as a whole, as we have about 10 minutes left on the program here. According to Stream Hatchet, which is a company that evaluates viewership and metrics across streaming websites, in the last 90 days, Valorant has enjoyed incredible viewership, logging more than 550 million hours of content watched. This exceeds Fortnite in Q2 2020, which was at 545 million, and has surpassed several major title launches, including Apex Legends launch, Fortnite Chapter 2, and Warzone. Stream Hatchet has a full breakdown of this, including bar graphs, etc., on their website. Now, with that said, certainly Twitch drops has a lot to do with that in the closed beta. We certainly understand that. Oh, look, there's a dog in Jacob's setup. Look at that. Is that Sager right there? Like
that is indeed Sager.
Hi, Sager.
Yes.
Sorry, I got distracted by the dog, as I always do. Going back to the numbers here, in particular, the T1 tournament peaked at around 50,000 for the final. And it was definitely in the 5 digits for much of the tournament. I know a lot of people online were comparing it to other leagues, maybe League of Legends, etc., and not necessarily reaching those numbers at this point. But Jacob, when you look at the numbers that were generated from the T1 tournament this weekend, are you optimistic about the future of Valorant esports and in particular the viewership, or are you pessimistic?
I'm optimistic, but that is also because my expectation at this current moment is different than many other people's. What I say that is I think that a lot of people need to pump the brakes a little bit on what they're expecting out of Valorant. In the sense that, like, yes, this is a Riot-developed game. Yes, I believe this game long-term is going to be successful. No, I do not think it gets there overnight. Right? Like, even Fortnite Esports, not Fortnite the game, but Fortnite Esports didn't get there overnight. Right? Like, I think it will take some time for Valorant to really catch on, and I think that those numbers that you just said are a little bit skewed because of the beta drops. In particular. And let me be clear, I don't think that Fortnite was wholly organic either. I do think that there were certain things that were done behind the scenes, not particularly by Epic, but I do think Twitch definitely gave it some boosting that it normally does not give other things on the platform. But yeah, like I am optimistic because my expectations are lower than the majority of the public. And I do think it will get there over time. I don't think that Valorant is a top esports game right now, and also the scene's like super underdeveloped. So give it some time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be fine. I think like people are probably comparing it to what the Overwatch League. What was the first like major Overwatch event in the West? Like in the actual West, was it?
It was MLG Vegas. It was MLG Vegas.
Okay. Because I'm trying to remember what the viewership numbers were for that, but I think the big thing was that they had a lot more promotion and like effort poured into making sure that the Overwatch tournaments went like really successfully and were already set up. Because I remember like that year as well, that was when the U.S. South Korea match hit like almost 300,000 or something like that for that World Cup match in the first year before the Overwatch League even started. Anyway, my point is that I feel like, again, talking about rosters can also be applied to talking about viewership numbers, and Valorant is in a really weird place where they've been pretty adamant about growing as organically as possible while also trying to balance the weight of expectations that everything has to be an esport now, right? Like that you have to have an esport from the ground running, and that the infrastructure is already going to be built up and everyone is going to be immediately competitive and the game is going to be immediately competitive and we're already going to have a world championship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think thus far, Riot has done a pretty good job of balancing those expectations, but I think part of the weight of those expectations are that you will have people looking at these viewership numbers and being like, oh, this is really good, and you'll have other people looking at it and being like, this is really, really bad. But I think it's fine for now. One thing I'm curious about with the initial streaming numbers, though, Arda, is did that include the Fortnite concert as well as the drops? Like, are those both falling in the same time frame? Like the Travis Scott concert?
So that 26+ million figure for the Travis Scott concert was actually in the game. So that was users in the game, which would not count as part of streaming.
All right.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to calculate, because I was like, if that's included, then that's
Fortnite
insane
blows it
for
away.
Valorant.
Like
but yeah,
even the device event that just happened, they capped it at 12 million users, and then 8 million more watched it on stream. But that would the 8 million would only count there. With the couple minutes we have remaining, let's talk about what's coming up, including the announcement of the Vitality Tournament, the first Valorant competitive tournament, the Vitality European Open, 128 teams, open tournament format. I think this is great. I think actually we're going to see this a lot, and I am not opposed to it whatsoever. I think that at least for the first 6 months, having opens, even in NA, are very welcome, because this is how you're going to, until we have a ladder system and a ranked system, and we see that, right? Yes. I agree. Exactly. Yeah.
Anyway.
That's right. That's exactly the reaction we should have, because that's what we want. Please, Riot, give it to us. They will one day, but maybe not as soon as we want it to happen, especially for orgs. But this is great. I'm looking forward to watching. This is the first big one. Of course, G2 had streamers involved, and we know how we feel about streamers, Emily. But this one, I'm really jazzed about this. I'm really pumped about it.
Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the reason why I think people have been writing off European talent a bit unfairly, in my opinion, as if you've heard me say anything about it on this show previously, is that I think that there's a lot of compositional creativity and a lot of really interesting things going on in Europe that are being tried out by a variety of teams that are considered amateur, because you don't have this same swapping of former CSGO pros en masse to Valorant that you do in North America, or even to some extent, like we've seen full Korean teams swap over and full Japanese teams swap over as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how teams perform in this. I think it's also a really good opportunity for Vitality themselves, who said they're going to use it as a scouting opportunity. That they told you that, Arda, directly, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think
other orgs as well, by the way. I've talked with a lot of major orgs. They all said the same thing. This is a scouting grounds for us.
Yeah, and I think I like that. I like the fact that I know, again, we in the show, I feel, have been a bit skewed towards North America, and I've said this previously, but and one of the reasons is because you don't have as many large orgs getting involved. I think more eyes should be on some of these minor European tournaments already, just because, again, we've talked about the previous Prodigy stack because of Mixwell and Scream, and we talked about Fish 123 when they were a unit. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things going on in Europe right now that people should be paying attention to, and I hope I hope this makes them.
Jacob, take the last point here.
Yeah, I think I don't know, right? I think that we will be in a position where the scene we're going to see in a couple of years is much different than where we are now. I think that overall that somebody in the chat said that generally someone in the chat generally said that a lot of these players are probably not going to be very good, and I don't necessarily disagree with that as either. So to both recap what we were talking about earlier about sort of viewership numbers and sort of the competitive scene at large, I'm cool with open tournaments. I think that we are going to. I think that it should stay this way for a while because I think building generic interest is, or genuine interest, sorry, is very important. I think Riot recognizes that. It's something it did fairly well with League of Legends, but now it is a multi-billion-dollar corporation in a way it wasn't back in 2011 and 2010 when it was trying to in 2012 when it was trying to prop up third-party tournaments back then with support. So they have a really cool opportunity here. I think that the player base will grow. I think that it will be. I think that the tournaments as a whole are going to help. I think Riot could do a better job at promoting more generally the tournaments, even though it's not their own business. But it is the Ignition Series events. In the case of the G2 tournament and the T1 tournament. So yeah, I'm generally optimistic, but I don't think we should be making hard judgments on anything in Valorant right now because I think the jury is still out on a lot of different things.
We're out of time, but the last thing I'll say is how cool would it be if and when Fish123 win this event, they just take off their t-shirts and reveal the team they've signed with.
That would be great.
That's my pro wrestling-esque booking for Fish123 once they win the Vitality tournament. Maybe they're signed to Vitality all along and they take them off like they're joining the NWO or something. Shirts come off, Vitality jerseys underneath. Emily, you're muted.
It's a little over the top.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say they didn't do as well in their most recent event, so that'd be cool though.
Well, we'll still have faith. Thank you very much for watching us here on the ESPN Esports Valorant Show. Whether you watched us on Twitch, on Twitter, on the ESPN app, or on YouTube, or listening to us in podcast form, thank you very much. We're on every single Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. The interview with Wardell is live at youtube.com/ESPN Esports. And don't go anywhere because we actually have ESPN Esports Artist Alley, which is coming up right now. Part 2 with our live jet skin design with Aaron Kramer is coming up next. Thanks for watching, everybody.